Very happy to welcome this afternoon Professor Robert Falkner from the LSE, who will deliver a talk about climate change. And the first question I would like to ask you is, to what extent have recent scientific controversies undermined the case for international climate change action?
Yeah, the last 2 years have seen a number of controversies around the hacked emails of the University of East Anglia and the controversy around the IPCC report. I think they have created some unease about how reliable climate science is. But in the end, the atmospheric scientists that have worked on global warming for a long time, for the last 2-3 decades, have produced enough sound and reliable knowledge so that we know that global warming is happening and that we know there is need to act. There will always be some uncertainty. It is never possible to predict future global warming trends with great accuracy. There will always be some debate about what the likely trends will be, but we know enough now to act, and I think therefore these controversies have not held back the international process.
What can developing countries do today to prepare for a warming climate in the future?
It's clear that there will be at least 2 degrees warming over the coming century, and developing countries will be most affected by this global warming trend. So they have a lot of challenges that they will face when it comes to rising sea levels, when it comes to worsening droughts, agricultural systems will be affected. So developing countries need to invest now, they need to prepare themselves against those adverse environmental changes. This requires investment in food security, this involves investing in urban environments where the livelihoods of people have to be secured against, for example, rising sea levels. Weather patterns will change, whereby greater incidences of hurricanes will afflict communities, and for that, developing countries can prepare now. The critical point, however, is they cannot do it on their own. They have to get access to international funding through the international community to help them prepare for those changes. So for that reason, we need a UN climate fund with sufficient resources to help adaptation make a difference in these countries.
Do you believe that the climate change negotiation process needs to be reformed?
We have had over 20 years of international negotiations that produced some results, the Kyoto Protocol, but it's not enough because many of the biggest emitters are not bound by the rules of the Kyoto Protocol. The United States and China and India, some of the biggest emitters today are not bound by these rules, and it has proved too difficult to negotiate a successor agreement to Kyoto that would bind these countries together in one legally binding comprehensive treaty. So in some ways, it is fair to say that the treaty negotiation process has not delivered the kind of global deal we need. So it's time to think about a reform. It doesn't mean we should abandon the negotiations. We still need to negotiate a global agreement. But it might mean changing the format, allowing some of the leading emitters to come together in smaller circles, in smaller groupings, to negotiate targets for emission trading. It might mean marching ahead with countries that are more willing to act on climate change, so-called coalitions of the willing. So there may need to be a greater deal of flexibility in the UN system, a less rigid negotiation process, one that drives forward climate action without everyone necessarily having to jump on the bandwagon. The danger is that this could disintegrate. The danger is this could fall apart. And for that reason, there are huge risks involved in this kind of reform process.
And are you optimistic about the possibility of reforming the system?
Well, I will always remain optimistic, but I think we need to be realistic about the difficulties of the diplomatic process. As power shifts from the United States and Europe towards Asia, as new emerging economies arise that are confident, that are increasingly assertive in international relations, it may prove more and more difficult to get a global deal done at these UN summits, but we have to try.
According to you, what is the responsibility of the industrialized or the developed countries in the climate change process in the South? To what extent do you believe that the North is responsible for the climate change and the famines that occurred in the developing countries?
Of course, in historic terms, most of the global warming effect that we can now observe was created and caused by the industrialized countries of the North. The United States, the European countries, to some extent Japan, have been emitting carbon emissions for the last 150 years. So they carry a great deal of historic responsibility for global warming. But it is developing countries that are mostly at the receiving end, that are suffering the consequences of climate change, even if they haven't contributed to the global warming effect. So there is a sense of inequality, of injustice in the way in which the North has in the past created the conditions that are now destroying livelihoods in the South.